Shalom. Welcome back to Understanding the World with Rabbi David Kaufman, and I'm joined today by Mark Finkelstein of the Jewish Federation, Jewish Community Relations Director. Mark, that was Mark.
Hello.
And we are talking before our break in our last segment about the foreign policy portions of the State of the Union, and State of the Union address, I should say. And
well, the first component, David, that you mentioned was America wants to stand by the steady progress towards democracy as exhibited within the Arab Spring. What do you think he's referring to?
In the Middle East, we will stand with citizens as they demand their universal rights and support stable transitions to democracy. The process will be messy, and we cannot presume to dictate the course of change in countries like Egypt, but we can and will insist on respect for the fundamental rights of all people. What I think that means is we're prioritizing democracy over being pro-U.S. We're going to oust pro-U.S. regimes in favor of democratically elected ones that hate us.
Is it a reasonable concept if somebody from the State Department were here? How would they counter that argument?
Well, I think the argument is that the reason they hate us is because we've been supporting dictators who have been oppressing them for decades. I mean, it works both ways. It does work both ways. But the question is, what is good for our foreign policy in the long or short term? Is there a long-term situation in which supporting people who will allowing dictatorial parties, theocratic parties like the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, to come in and oppress not only different people, but oppress them worse than the dictator did when the dictator was in power? How does that make us look better, that we've allowed that to happen or even encouraged it to happen? There are people in the Middle East right now who, in Egypt right now, who are saying, how did the United States let the Muslim Brotherhood come to power, create a constitution that oppresses women and minorities, and then has jailed and killed more protesters than the Mubarak regime did when we were supporting them, and then rigged the elections so that no one will ever have a chance to defeat them? How is that a good thing done by the United States for the people of Egypt?
Well,
that's a question.
What is the clause in the State of the Union that addresses that?
Well, the process will be messy, and we cannot presume to dictate the course of change in countries like Egypt.
Well,
how about Tunisia? How about Libya?
Right, all those other particular. What about Yemen too?
Yemen. I mean,
it's all over the place.
We have now created a democratically elected, never to be elected again, set of governments in the Middle East that are all theocratic, oppressive governments. Now we can see what they turn into, and 100 years from now, we may have better relations with the great grandchildren of the people who are there now. I don't know, right. But in the meantime, we've got a pro-terrorist, anti-Israel, anti-American alliance
in the name of promoting
democracy. Well, and to be perfectly honest, they're also anti-women, anti-Christian, anti-Jewish, anti-minority. In places, you can, the whole north of Africa right now, Sudan going down and then going around the Mediterranean. We've created a very, very, very hostile place where people are starting to work with Iran. You've got rebel groups running around North Africa from one place to another. There were reports today that the rebel fighters in Mali are the other day, not today, but I saw the other day, that rebel fighters in Mali are fleeing into Sudan and are resting in hotels in Darfur before they turn around and go back and fight. So they're coming to Sudan. Sudan is sitting there receiving fighters from Syria in Port Sudan, holding them in the hospitals, getting them better. Iran is sitting there working. You've got fighters coming from further west in Africa into Sudan. The hotbed is sitting there right there, Sudan and Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood, and Sudan, with Iran coming in. And if we're worried about who controls the Suez Canal, if you look at the map and you see what's going on when you get down into the southern portions of the by Sudan and getting toward the Red Sea and getting up to the Suez. If Iran has naval vessels patrolling right there, they can control the Suez just as easily as they could if they were sitting up at Suez itself. And so there are a lot of issues going on here. There's a concern about the Syrian regime in context here, because what does pursuing democracy and stable democracy mean in dealing with Syria? Do we really want all these rebel groups that are allied, that are letting al-Nusra and al-Qaeda allied organization lead them?
Well, there's some indication that the United States wants to differentiate between, I don't know where the differentiation is between the bad guys and the good guys in the resistance. Do you see any criteria at present being applied to that?
Well, what it looks like is in Syria, from what I understand, what's going on in Syria is you have a number of rebel groups that have nothing to do with Syria.
That's right.
Who are there fighting alongside the rebel groups.
Right.
Their intent is, I think, to try to install Islamist government there, and then probably to go elsewhere. Their concerns at this point are that maybe these organizations will try to work against Israel as soon as they're done working against Syria. It's right next door.
Well,
they don't have to go very far.
The rhetoric is that as well.
I would tend to think that a not insignificant possibility is that things get worse in Lebanon, because these guys are Sunni radicals, and I don't think they like the fact that the Shiites are controlling Lebanon. So I'm not so sure that we don't shift from Syria to Lebanon instead of shifting from Syria against Israel. Because what these groups would really like to do is get a Sunni, radical Sunni-controlled alliance that surrounds Israel instead of having to worry about Iran. They don't like Iran. They like Iran better than they like Israel, but that's not saying much.
Well, who are the detractors of the Hashemite kingdom then? Are they tending to be? They have to be Sunni. They're not Shiite.
What do you mean?
Who would destabilize Jordan? If
all kinds of people would try to destabilize Jordan. I mean, Jordan is in a very precarious position here. Jordan is seen as working with the United States and Israel. I think really that those alliances are probably the only thing that's keeping it stable at all. I talked even last week about the fact that if the border between the West Bank and Jordan fell, you'd destabilize Jordan already. If there are attacks coming, if rockets are falling on Jordan from Iran, even accidentally, that could cause problems. If these fighters spill over from Syria into Jordan, that could cause all kinds of problems. That could be an immediate major destabilizing factor because, one, Jordan's got a lot of open space. It's got a significant population of people who are not part of the leadership.
Yeah.
And so you have a very similar situation to what you've got in Syria. And none of the nationalist governments in the Middle East can feel stable, especially when the United States is taking a position like this. Because the United States taking a position in which it's saying we're going to support democracy against our dictator friends, against our monarch friends. And these radical Islamist fighters are coming out there and saying democracy, 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 jihad, jihad, jihad. Who are we supporting? We're supporting the jihadis? It looks like what we're doing. And the people on the ground are saying the United States is not going to stand up for their friend, the King of Jordan. They're going to fight for democracy.
Now, how does this play within the left in the United States? How do you think they read the situation?
Mark, we just had a State of the Union speech in which none of this stuff was mentioned more than a few sentences at all. I would say the vast majority of Americans don't even understand it, don't know anything about it, much less understand it. And to be perfectly honest, the vast majority of Americans don't care about it. They should, but I don't think they do.
Well, let me ask, look, you got two strands of people. You got certainly the very left, which identify for some reason or other with the most repressive regimes in the Middle East, even though they share none of the values of the pacifistic community. And you have average Americans. Do you see average Americans turning isolationist?
I think Americans right now, by and large, are isolationist. I don't think they're calling it that because it's a taboo word. But I think if you look at the way we're actually acting right now, if you look at the fact that we're trying to pull out of everywhere we are, there's little or no desire to get involved anywhere else.
Well, that's simply
nations around the world. We're kind of, the president, I think, is trying to portray us as being post-World War II environment. I think we're more post-World War I environment, which is that post-World War I, there were a lot of threats in the world, and the United States saw the threats and didn't want to do anything about them because we were so war-weary. World War I was such an awful war that people didn't want to engage. And what ended up happening was we ended up allowing evil to flourish in the world.
Yes.
And this was not allowed simply by one political party. It was allowed by both political parties.
That's right. My question for you then is, what role does Rand Paul play in this, since he's coming from the right instead of from the left?
Well, I believe that we've got this on both sides. I believe you've got people who are saying we simply can't afford to fight wars. So you've got the economic fiscal argument. You've got the argument that says the United States shouldn't be trying to affect the policies in other nations. We had that. The president just said that in his speech. And you've got the idea that that we simply don't have the ability to be the police of the world right now, and therefore we can't send our soldiers everywhere. But what happens is that means that people who would otherwise be worried of the United States stepping in to stop them are now perfectly happy to stand up to the United States, slap it in the face, and say, here's what I'm going to do. So we need to take a break. When we get back from the break, we'll wrap up with all of the various topics we've got for today. Thanks.